Hey everyone, welcome back to the React In-Depth series. In this video, we're going to go over a bunch of exercises together to get more practice with conditional rendering in React together. In the previous video, we looked at a bit of how conditional rendering actually works and kind of the different methods we can use, things like if-else statements and switch statements, and then even some of the kind of shortcuts like ternary and the logical operators. So in this video, we're just going to kind of go into a bit more depth with some more practical examples, as well as some things that you might actually see when you actually work with conditional rendering in real life. So let's take a look at them together. All right, so to start, I have all these exercises prepared, a warm-up and 3 exercises here. So as with all the previous videos, I have these up on GitHub if you prefer to grab that and clone it down to follow along, or you can just pause the video and go through the instructions with me as I kind of go through them one at a time, whichever is easier for you. So to start, let's do a warm-up exercise. For this one, I'd like you to create a new Vite project for React, and we'll probably be using that throughout all these exercises together. Then I'd like you to create a file named button.jsx that exports a component with the same name, and then have this button component take a prop named loading. Also make this component return a button with the text loading inside of it. If the prop is true, so if this loading prop is true right here, we want to actually return the loading text inside the button. But if it's false, we want to return click me inside the button as text instead. Okay, so depending on what this prop is, we're going to show different values inside of this button tag. Then I want you to import button into the main.jsx and replace the app component in there with it, and make sure to pass in the loading prop while you're doing this. You can actually pass it into button. And then to make sure this works, test it in your browser and see if you actually get the right render when it's true, and then go back to your code, switch the prop to false, and then go back to Chrome or Firefox or Safari, whatever you're using, and make sure it actually renders correctly with either loading or click me, depending on the actual prop state. So give that a shot, and then we will go through it together. All right, so to start, I'll just pull up my terminal here. I'll run npm create, I'll do vite at latest, and I'll just use this for the rest of the exercises as well. We are doing conditional rendering exercises. Nice long name there. I'll do React, and I'll do JavaScript. I'll change to that folder. I'll run my npm install, and I'll open that up while I wait for that to go. Here's my source folder. So I'm just going to create a warm-up folder in here. I'll do warm-up, and inside warm-up, I'm going to create that button.jsx file. And once I have this ready, I'm going to create a function. This will be called button. Computer is churning away here while it's npm installing, so it's a little bit janky while it's doing that in the background there. I'll do export default button. And we said that this button is going to take a loading prop. So you could have either done this, you could say props, just like that, and actually do like props.loading. But since this is the only prop that I'm interested in, I'm actually going to destructure it out right here, just to grab loading directly out of the prop. So I can just refer to it without having to use like props dot or whatever you name to your props object. Okay. Cool. So once that's done, I want to return a button. Just like that. And I will save that for now. And here is my npm install is done. So I'm going to run npm run dev. And that's going to start up. I'll grab that URL once it comes through. And there it is. And I will do a copy there, and I will switch to Chrome. I'll create a new tab, and I'll just paste that in, and I should get my actual Vite server. There we go. I want to zoom in, not out. There we go. And I will run inspect here to bring up my dev tools. Hopefully that eventually loads. So not sure why it's a bit laggy there. Okay, so that is good. Then what I want to do next is I want to actually return in my button. I'm going to return some text depending on what is actually happening. So let's think about this. And I'm going to close this terminal here just so that we have a bit more space to work with. So I said that in the warm-up, I wanted to return either, where was it? Either loading ... or click me if it was true or false, depending on which one it's true or false, right? So if I switch back here, how am I going to kind of accomplish that? So let me just make sure this actually works. So I'm going to just run loading ... in here, and I'll save that. And if I switch to, where is it, my main.jsx file here, what I can do is I can get rid of this CSS. I don't really need that anymore. And I'm going to import, I'll do button from warmup / button.jsx. And I'm going to replace this right here with that button. Perfect. So I'll save that. That should actually get that loaded up into my DOM. And then there we go. I have loading actually showing, and then clicking on this, of course, does nothing at all. So that's good. So we have that working. But that's not what we want. We want this to conditionally render depending on what the state of loading is. So if loading is true, we want it to say loading. Otherwise, we want it to say click me. So one way we could do this is by doing a JavaScript directly in here, right? So I can say, I can do a ternary, right? So I can say loading ? If loading is true, right? This means if this is true, then I want to return the text loading. Otherwise, I want to return the text click me, just like that. So this is basically saying, is loading true? Do this and put it in there, evaluate to this value, otherwise evaluate to that value. And this is a shorter version of doing the if-else statement. Pretty nice to be able to do this in here, just like that. And if I switch back in here, we can see that we get click me. And I think that is because by default, it is false, so it's undefined. So right now what is happening is we are, if I console.log out loading, we will see that loading is undefined, and that is falsy because I'm not passing it in as a prop. So up in main here, I need to pass in loading, just like that. And I can pass in a Boolean value here. So make sure to put this in JavaScript, in brackets, just so that React can evaluate this as JavaScript values, not just a string. So if I put true in here, I'll say that loading is true, and then I'm passing loading down to this button component, and I should see loading. And then if I come back here and I change that value to be false, and I save that instead, now I'm passing down false to this button, and this ternary is going to evaluate to if loading is false, then we're going to have click me instead, and we should see click me. And there we go. So that's a pretty quick component with conditional rendering. In this case, using a ternary operator, you could do this with an if-else statement or even a switch statement if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter. I think if this is pretty concise. Generally, I'm not a fan of having logic, like too much logic inside the actual components, or inside, the JSX like this, inside the components. Because you can imagine if there's like dozens of lines of random JavaScript logics, like map and reduce or whatever it is that you're doing in here, mixed with all this stuff, it becomes very complicated to read. I like to have the JSX basically just be the visual representation of exactly what's happening, and all the logic can happen in the component scope right above it, which is up here. So one way we could do this, just so I can show you, is I could say const button text is equal to, and I could take this and I could literally paste it here, right? So I'll just get rid of this console log. So I'm evaluating this logic up here, and then I can put that value directly down in here. And this is the exact same thing. This is just following that kind of pattern of having all of our logic above our actual JSX. And you'll see that that's going to return the exact same thing here. And if I come back to my main and I change this to be true, we will see the exact same result, which is this is going to come back as loading. There we go. Right. So it's up to you. I don't want to spend too much time on this one right here, but hopefully you can make a decision for yourself which you kind of prefer. Do you like having the logic up here, or do you kind of want to just do it all in one place? Keep in mind that other people are probably eventually going to be reading your code as well. So whatever you think is probably best for the size of the project and the team that you're working with. And if it's for yourself, you can make whatever decision that you like. Cool. So hopefully that one makes sense. Let's take a look at exercise 1 together. Cool. So exercise 1, same thing, create a Vite project for React. If you haven't done that already, or you can just use the existing React project that we're working on right now in Vite. But in this one, same instructions, just some small changes from the warm-up exercise. So same thing, create a file name button and export a button component from it. Then what I want you to do now is create a state inside button using useState and start it off as a Boolean value of true. Okay, so this is different. We're using state now, we're not using props. Have button return a button with the text loading if the state is true and click me if it's false. So this is the exact same thing, but this is using useState instead of the actual prop values. Add an onClick to toggle this state between true and false for that button. Okay, and this is in the button right here. So import button into main.jsx, replace your app with it, and test that it works in your browser, and you should see it toggling between the two states. So give that a shot, and then we can go through a solution together. Okay, so I will create a new folder here. I'll just do ex1. Same thing, I'll do a button.jsx file in here. Same name as before, so that's why we should use good folder names. Function button here, no props this time, and I will export default button there. And here I need to import useState from React, so I'm going to import that. This is useState. I'll do that to quickly import that, and I'll say const, and then I'll just say I don't know, like I'll just do loading and set loading. Why not? Equals to useState, and this can be true to start. And then what I want to do is I want to return a button. And this button is going to have some text inside of it, depending on what the value of this this actually is. So one thing we need to do though is have an onClick on this button as well. So let's deal with the actual text first. So I'll copy what I had before. I'll say const button text. So if it's loading, right? This is a nice way. This is also why I like to kind of separate it out from the JSX. I can think of the logic just in terms of JavaScript without a bunch of HTML or JSX around it. Is like, if in this case, if loading is true, what do I want the button text to be? Well, I want it to be loading. And if it's false, I want it to be click me. All right, so that's simple enough. And I can just kind of cram that in here now. So that's the text, button text. Now the difference here is that the slight difference is that this is now state. Right? So if this value changes, just like if props changed before, so if a parent changed that prop, the same behavior would happen. In this case, we have control indirectly in this component to change the state if we need to. And if loading changes, then it's going to re-render this component, and we're going to have a new value of, this is going to re-evaluate, and then we're going to have a new value of button text. So I want the onClick for this button to do something. Well, what do I want it to do? Well, I want it to change loading. I could do this inline. I'm going to go with my theme of putting everything up here. I'll just say function, or you can do an arrow function. It doesn't really matter. I'll just call this toggle button text. And I want to take set loading. And I'll show you something neat. So we could basically set loading to the opposite value of loading. That's one way to do it. Or if we didn't have access to loading, for example, this was passed down from us and we only had the function, we can take the previous value and we can just return the inverted version of that previous value. Okay, so both of those are the same thing. I kind of like this way because it also prevents bugs if you have multiple calls in one function. Because of how they're kind of lined up one after the other. But it's really up to you, whichever version you like, and you can name these whatever you like. In this case, I would probably rename this. I just want to show you that this is the previous state, and we're taking the inverse of the previous state. So we're flipping that from true to false or false to true. And then we're setting loading to be that. And then I can simply take this toggle button text and put it in the onClick there. Okay, so you can probably see, right, that this is pretty clean right here. There's no real logic here. This is just referencing variables that we've created. In this case, this string variable right here, which is calculated depending on this Boolean condition, and then this function variable right here, which is going to set the loading state. So that's pretty cool. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to come back to main, and I'm going to import button again. But this is from ex1 .jsx there instead. and I don't even need to pass in this anymore. So I'll just comment that one out just so that we have that there. And I'll put button like that in there directly. All right, cool. So let's switch back and see what we get. So we get loading to start, and that is because we set it to be true. And if I click on this, it'll switch to click me, and then it goes back to loading, and then click me, and I can just keep doing that over and over again, right? And it starts off as loading because of the state starting off as true, right? So this is going to be true. We're going to have it loading, and that's going to be the text. And every time we click it, it's just going to flip it to the opposite. So false, true, false, true, false, true. And that's why we're seeing this entire re-render happening. And just to show you what's happening here, just so it's super clear, I'm just going to do a console log of this button text, just so you can see this is going to run every single re-render no matter what. And I'll also, why not beside it, I'll just put this is going to be loading and button text, just so we can see that. And if I switch the console and I refresh the page here, when this component mounts, we'll see that loading is true. So we see loading, I click on loading, it's false, and click me. And again, this is happening because of the re-render, right? So this is like an empty use effect almost. It's just running synchronously in this case, and click it again. You can see it just keeps toggling back and forth. Okay, so there you go. That's pretty much conditional rendering for this specific button, but using state within the actual component. Let's take a look at the second exercise together. Okay, so for this one, again, create a new project if you haven't already, or just use your existing React project. I'd like you to create a file called auth, short for authentication or authorization .jsx that exports a component of the same name, in this case auth. And add state to auth with use state that starts off with an empty string. Have auth return an input for text as well as a p tag below that input. Okay. Then make it so the p tag, the paragraph, displays this text, enter the correct password, while the state is not the string secret. Wow, that was a hard word sentence to say. While the state is not secret, so this is kind of the secret password, we want to leave the text inside that paragraph to be entered the correct password. When the text has been entered correctly to be secret, the exact string lowercase secret, we want that paragraph text to display successfully logged in instead. And you can change this state on the text input to achieve this as someone is typing inside of it. Then import it into your main.jsx file, test that it works in your browser by entering the strings into input, eventually having secret, and then hopefully that actually works. So give that your best shot, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so to start, I will create a new file or new folder. I'll do ex2. And I will do, what did I say? This is going to be auth.jsx. Okay, so in here, I'll do function auth. And I know that I need to use useState. So I'll do import useState from React. And I'm going to say const. And then I will say password and then set password, because that's going to be basically the state, the idea of the state that we're using, use state, and it's going to be an empty string to start. Okay. Then we want to return, and I'm going to return a fragment here because I'm going to return a couple things. First thing I'm going to return is an input type text, so that's good. Then I'm going to return a paragraph tag that's going to have some text inside of it. Okay, now what do we want to do? Well, we want to make it so, well, first we need to export this. So I always forget that every single time. So I'm going to put that in here before I forget. Export default. You got to make sure you spell the thing correctly as well. There you go, off. We want to make it so that when you type in this input, we are going to change kind of what's being displayed in here. And by default, this text inside here, inside this paragraph is going to say, I already forgot. It's going to say, enter the correct password. Let me just copy that so I don't forget anything. And then it's going to switch to successfully logged in. So this is actually going to be pretty similar. So we're going to say const p text is equal to, we want to see what are we checking? Well, we're checking to see if the password is equal to secret, right? So I want to check, is the password equal to secret, the string secret. And if it is, then I want to give you this text. Otherwise, I want to evaluate, I'm gonna put this on a separate line here, to successfully logged in. And I'll save that, and hopefully it reformats nicely for me. There we go. So here we have quite a long-looking ternary, right? This is the condition right here. Is password equal to secret? If that is true, we get this value. Otherwise, we get that value. So slightly longer. Now, it's up to you. If you want to put this as a ternary, great. If you want to use an if, an else, or something else, that's also great. It really depends on what's easier kind of for you to follow, which you're more comfortable with. Frankly, I would say if the ternary is much longer than this, I probably would opt for something else. But in this case, it's good enough. I mean, it's still kind of long, but I'm okay with it. It's a simple condition, and then it's kind of just one of two string values. So that's not too bad. So I'll leave it at that for the ternary. And I'm going to put the p text in here. Okay, so let's test if this works, because to start, what we should see is enter correct password, right? Because it's not equal to secret. Or actually, did I do this wrong? I think I gotta flip these around. Is it equal to secret? Then if it is equal to secret, then successfully logged in. So I can change this around. I can say either not, or I can flip these around, and I can do it like that. And I can just flip these around, or I could have just switched it to not equal to, whichever you prefer. But I think this makes more sense. Is it equal to secret? Then you successfully logged in. Otherwise, you have to enter the correct password, right? So let's switch back to our main and import this and make sure it works. So this was called auth, and we're importing it from auth.jsx in exercise 2 folder. And I'll just comment that one out as well, and I will put my auth in here. Perfect. And if I switch back here, once that loads up, we should see our input, and then we should see input enter correct password because the password is not secret. And in this case, we have no way to actually change the password value because we don't have a way to change the state. So if I switch back here, you can see that it starts off as an empty string. We currently have no way to change this to be anything from an empty string. So just to show you what I mean, if I switch this to be secret, it's going to start off as secret, and then we'll actually see that you're successfully logged in. Okay, so we're trying to get it to that state, but dynamically depending on what is entered inside this input. So I'm going to say on change, or you can do on input, and I'll say handle input. Probably a better word for this is like check password. Let's go with that. Let's use some good names. And I'll say function check password. This is going to grab the event, and we're going to test the event's target.value, right? Because that's going to be the value of the text field. So we're going to say set the password to be e.target.value, which is going to, the target is this input tag, and then the value is going to be the actual value inside of there. So what's going to happen here is as I type in this, every single letter that I type is going to trigger this change event, and this function, it's going to trigger the set password to be the target.value, which is going to change this state right here. And when that state changes, this entire function is going to re-render. We're going to rerun this condition check right here, and that text is going to change. The evaluated text for ptext is going to change depending on this condition right here, which might either be true or false, and then we will see that value differently down here in ptext as we type. So if I come back in here, I think I should be good there. Let me reload the page. Probably had nothing. Some wrong variable names in there, but let me start typing in here. So I'll start typing like monkey. That's no good. I'll start typing secret, and moment of truth. There we go. Okay, so you can see that triggered right away. If I add any text in here, you can see it switches back and forth quite nicely. Right? So that actually works really nice. So what you can imagine is that you could actually use this same concept for a lot of things for authentication, and it's a very common practice where if you're logged in, you might be showing something on the screen maybe it's a profile, or maybe it's a sidebar, or maybe it's some other kind of badge or something. And if you're not logged in, then you're not going to see that component or that series of components, and that can dynamically change because it's part of the state, and that will just automatically re-render and change what's being shown on the screen, which is really nice. So this is actually a very, very powerful concept and used all the time. So that's pretty cool. Hopefully that one makes sense. Let's take a look at exercise 3. Okay, so for the final exercise, this is going to be a fun one. Again, create a new project if you haven't already in Vite for React, or use the existing one. And then I want you to create a file called names.jsx that exports names.jsx file of the same name. That was also a tongue twister. Add state to names with the use state and start off this time as an empty array. Okay. What I want you to then do is make names return kind of this right here. So it's going to return an input, very similar to like what we just saw, which is where we're going to start typing like any value, like a text input. And we're going to be typing a name in there. Then it's going to be a button to submit the name. All right. And it's going to have several p tags, one for each name in the array. However, there's going to be a condition for this one, which I'll get to shortly. Okay, so we'll have at least 2 elements in there all the time, and potentially more p tags below that, depending on these conditions that I'll mention. So what are these conditions? Well, the goal is to make it so that we're going to make a p tag for each name in the list of the array in our state. Okay, and you can add to this array by typing into the name input and clicking the submit button. All right. However, you should only show names and render out paragraph tags that start with the letter capital A. Okay, so we're going to ignore any names and not show paragraph tags for names that have a capital A. And if you want to be fancy, you can even just show them, but have them striked out or add some styling, or show them in kind of a different kind of text or something. But I want to keep this super simple and just make sure that we can focus on the logic to get this going, and then you can add on top of that. So we're going to have the input, type in a name, click the button to add the name, and if the name starts with A, it will show up as a paragraph tag along with all the other previous names that start with A, or it's not going to show up at all if it doesn't start with A. Okay, so test that this works in your browser, and once you have that working, see if your solution kind of matches what I have, because there's many different cool ways to do this. So give it a shot, and then we'll go through it together. All right, so here we go. Exercise 3. Exercise 3. I'll create names.jsx, and I will do function names, and I'll do export default function, or export default names. And I know I need use state, so I'm going to import that use state. Cool. So now I want an array of names in state. So I'm going to say const names set names is equal to use state, and this is going to start off as an empty array. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return some JSX, and in here I said I want to have an input. It's going to be type text. I'm going to have a button that's going to say submit, or I'll just say add name. Why not? Just make it fun. Add name exclamation. And then we're going to have some number of paragraph tags below this. But I'm not going to put that in there right now. I'm going to focus on kind of this part where I'm going to make sure I'm adding names to the array. So I'm going to say onClick is going to say add name, and I'm going to define that function. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say function add name, and this is going to take set names, and we're going to get the previous names, and we're going to make sure to not push. Again, we went over this in the state examples for React. We want to return a brand new reference for this variable so that React knows that this is not the same using object.is. So we need a brand new array with the previous value. So one way to do that is to spread out the previous names. So you can do that with the actual names variable, or you can just use previous names like this. And then I want to add, in this case, the E, we actually need access to this input. So we'll do that in a second. So we're basically going to get access to, I'll just put this here, the new name. Okay, we want to put that in here, but this needs to be defined. So let's think about this. We need access to the inputs text. So how do we get access to an inputs text from a button click that has a different event? So we saw this in previous videos. One nice way to do this is by using useRef. We could have also hooked up this input to be a bunch of state. So it really depends on kind of how you want to go about it. I would just go with the controlled input for now, just to show you one particular example. So I'll just say const input text set input text. And this is going to equal to use state, and it'll be an empty string to start. And the value of this input is going to be input text. Okay, so that's going to be an empty string to start. But we want that to change, because if I type in this, I want it to actually change the input text so that this is not forever blank. So let me show you what I mean. So if I come back to main.jsx, let me just import names to show you. So I'll do names, and that's imported, and I'll just comment that one out, and I will do names. And I'll go back here, and I'll see that we have this input and then the add name. And you can see that we have a value prop without an on change, and React is kind of warning us that, hey, this doesn't really make sense, because you can see if I'm trying to type in here, hopefully you can hear that. I'm trying to type in this and I can't type, right? And the reason is that we have a like semi-controlled input, which means that this is just forever going to be the value of input text, no matter what, which is always going to be the empty string. So we need a way to change that empty string. So we need to add an on change to be, well, let's just say handle, I'll just go with the generic one, handle input. Okay, and I'll go function. I know this is going behind my head here, but hopefully you can see this part here, handle input. So what do I want to do with this handle input? Well, I'm going to grab the event, and I'm going to say that's going to be the event from this input, right? Because note that when I grab the event from add name, that's going to be the event from the button, which is not going to have the text in it. The text is going to be in the input field. So I'm going to say set input text to be e.target.value. Okay, so I'm going to grab that event's value, and I'm going to basically shove it into the state, and that's going to cause React to re-render whatever is in here displayed in the actual input tag. Now, if I switch back here and I reload the page, that warning is gone, and I can actually start typing in here. And to prove to you that's what's happening, let me do a console.log of the input text. And you should probably put this in a use effects, but this is going to run on every single re-render. And we can see that it's hello, and I'll put space there. And you can see that it just keeps getting added. If I backspace, you can see that it just keeps going back. So the state is changing and re-rendering this entire component every single time we click and change in this input. Is that efficient? Not if you don't need it to be a controlled input. So there's definitely trade-offs and pros and cons to doing it this way. However, this is probably the most common way to create a controlled input. The other way would be to use a useRef and then just hook into this DOM elements directly. But in this case, we want to make sure that the state is synced between the two. So it really depends on kind of which way you're more comfortable using. I would probably just go with this way to make sure the state is actually synced up between the actual input tag and this state right here. And you'll see why in a second. So that it makes it easier, for example, to clear the state and actually sync back to the view of the actual input. So I'll get rid of this log here. I don't need that anymore. Now what we have is inside of add name, we have this variable. We have a way to access that new name all the time as its current value, and that is the input text. So we're going to add input text at the end of this array along with all the previous names as soon as you click the button. And this is because we couldn't grab it through the event because that was the button click event. Okay, so that's pretty good. And if we want to be fancy here, what we can do is when you click on add name, we can do set input text not set interval, set input text to be an empty string again if we want, and that'll clear the input quite nicely. So let me show you what this is doing. So if I start typing hello and I click add name, that's going to get cleared out. And that's just going to happen because we're setting that value to be synced directly every time that set state is being called. Okay, so now we have names being set, but we're not using names anywhere. So what we can do is I'm going to show you two ways to do this. I'm going to show you the way that I'm not really a fan of, and then a small change that we can make to make it a bit nicer based on everything that I said previously. What you'll sometimes see is now we want to make sure that inside this JSX markup, we want to make a paragraph tag for every single name. So what you'll sometimes see is we'll take that thing we want to map over, in this case, the names list, and we'll call .map on it. Now remember that JavaScript requires us to return JSX basically in here, and a few other things like Boolean values and undefined and whatnot, but really we want to return JSX here. That's the point of this. So we're going to map over every single item in names, and we're going to return a JSX item, and when in this case a paragraph tag for each of those, and we're going to have an array of paragraph tags in JSX, and then React knows to render that as separately each single value. So we're going to take each name, and then for that name, I'm going to return a paragraph tag with that name. All right. And I need to make sure that this name is, I'll show you what happens if I do this without using the variable name, instead of just typing name in here. We'll see name. Right? So if I reload the page, I had 3 there already. So if I start type ASDF, we have name. We'll have ASDF, I have name in there, and we're getting name, always being listed in there. So that's not what we want. We also have a warning, which I'll mention shortly in a second, but let's focus on this to start, because that's not what we want. We want the actual name value itself, which is why we had to tell JavaScript, please evaluate this as, or React, we had to tell React, please evaluate this as like JavaScript, in this case, this name right here. So we put curly brackets around it, and that's actually going to get evaluated as the actual name. So you can see if I start typing monkey and I press add name, monkey shows up. If I start typing Ben, Ben will show up, and there we go. So that actually works. So that's pretty good. Now the problem is that we want this to only map out the names that start with the letter B, I think it was, right? Let me switch back in here, or was it A? It was A. There we go, A. So this is not going to work, right? We want to first get rid of all of the ones that don't start with the letter A, and then return a paragraph tag for every single one that does start with A. So there's a few ways to do that. We could probably do it manually, like using loops and create an array, or we could just use the functional methods like array, reduce, map, or filter. In this case, I'm going to filter names, and then I'm going to map over it. So I'm going to say I want to filter all the names, and if I want to return true for the name if it starts with a capital B. So name dot starts with capital B. And this is a string method that returns true if it starts with this string and false otherwise. So I'm saying take all the names in names, filter through them. So return true or false in an array. So it's going to be like true, true, false, false, true, depending on what that name is. If it starts with B, or why do I say B all the time? I think I said A in the example. Starts with A, then we want to keep it. Otherwise, we want to get rid of it. And then once we have that, then we can map over that, because that's just going to be an array of Boolean values, which we don't want. We want to map over that and actually return a p tag for each of those names. So I'll save this, and you can see that it reformats for me into this structure right here. And if I switch back here, I'm going to start typing in here. So I'll start typing, let's go with monkey, and I'll click add name. And actually, before I do this, let me do this. I'll come up here, and I'll do a console.log of our names, just so we can see that that's actually being added correctly. So we can see we have monkey, Ben, and monkey in there from my previous typing. I'll put my name in here. I'll put Natter, and I'll click add name. And you can see Natter gets added in there. I'm running this on every re-render. I probably shouldn't do that. This is why you should probably put it as a dependency. But then what I want to do is, let me try an A word. So I'll put Amy, and I'll press add name. And Amy is added to that list. And Amy is the only person who shows up in this list down here, right? This is the only p tag. If I open up my my DOM right here, this is the only p tag is Amy right there, right? The other values like myself and monkey are not in there. Only Amy is in there because Amy is the only one that starts with A. All right, so that works pretty nicely, and that's pretty much the solution. The only challenge is that a few things actually. One is the key thing, so I'll mention that shortly. But you can probably start to see, I really don't like having so much logic in my JSX. I don't know, like some people really like this. I'm gonna just make an opinionated call and say that I'm not a fan of this. I like to have the JSX be very clear as to what is visually showing on the screen. I don't want to have to think about like, oh, like what is this gonna, is this true, is this false, is it gonna map over many things, is it one thing, like what like I don't want to read the logic. If I want to read the logic, I want to go up to the function and actually figure that out. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take all this code, I'm gonna cut it, and I'm gonna come up here and I'm going to just assign it to a variable. I'll say const filtered names is equal to this. You can do this, or you can do this. I'm going to say function generate filtered names. There's some small differences between these, but frankly, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to say return names.filter.map. Right? So these are basically the same thing. It depends if you want to use the function or you just want to put it into an actual variable. If this is very complicated to calculate every single time, it might be more efficient to put it in a function, but it also just going to get rerun and render every single time. So it doesn't really matter in this case too much. You can memorize this and do other things like that in the future, but again, it doesn't really matter. The main thing is that I want to remove the logic outside of the JSX. So down here, I can just say filtered names. I'll make this plural, filtered names. Okay. Now, I'd like you to compare kind of the before and after, right? If you like rewind a little bit and you compare this markup to what we had before, which is easier to read, right? I would probably say this is easier to read, right? And if you're interested in what filtered names are, then you can come up here and you can actually look at it. But if you're not interested in that, then you can just skip past it and keep going to the rest of JSX that you might be looking at. Another way to do this is by doing this. We can do generate filtered names, and I can just call that function. Okay, and that's going to do the exact same thing. It's just going to be through a function call. So if I come back here, what we'll see is that both of those are actually being rendered out. So if I say avatar and I click add, you can see that both of those are being rendered out. So this is the first list right here. This is the second list right here. And that's coming from both of those function calls, or this one function call and then this evaluation of that filter and map. Okay. So let me refresh this, and I think we'll get that warning back. Let me add something. ABC. Oh, it went away. Okay. So I think that's because of our little refactor. But what you'll sometimes see is we want the key prop is missing for something that we're mapping and filtering over. Now, in this case, it's a bit challenging to do that because we don't have anything like an ID. But what you would normally do is for filtering or making lists of components like this, React actually needs a way in what is called the virtual DOM to be able to differentiate between different p tags during re-renders. And the way that it does that is by looking at what's called the key prop. And this needs to be unique for every single value in this array, but it also needs to be consistent across the renders. So we can't do something like sometimes you'll see people do like math.random or something like that in here. Like you can't do this because this is not consistent across all the renders. That's going to change every single re-render, and I'll defeat the point of giving it a key. In this case, our keys our names are probably unique. So I can probably do something like name as a key, and that would fix it. Or you normally would get this from like an API. If you're mapping over a whole bunch of things and you would use the ID for each value or something like that, some unique item that's consistent across renders. So that's the same value for that particular entry across renders, and you're not randomly generating it on the front end. So that React can take those IDs and actually do a diffing algorithm behind the scenes to make that work. Is it absolutely necessary? No, it's just a little optimization benefit. If you're interested in this, we'll kind of go through this in future videos. It's not really the end of the day. If you miss it, you'll just get that warning. Just be aware that you want some value, usually from an API that has an ID attribute, or you want to be able to create some structure that has a consistent across your rendered ID for that particular entry. And you can have multiple entries that have different IDs that are unique for every single one. Okay, so if I switch back here, what we can see is now that this actually works quite nicely. So I'll just go with, let's just go with my name here, Nader. I'll add my name, and then I'll click on, let's go with Amanda and add. And I think this is coming from my other one that doesn't have a key prop. Only one of them has a key prop right now. So that was the error I was talking about. You see Amanda does show up, and that actually works correctly as we would expect. And a nice addition to this would be to make sure maybe you could support both uppercase and lowercase if you want. So you could like 2 lowercase it first or 2 uppercase the input. There's all sorts of fun things you can do with this. But you can see that this is definitely a little bit more involved. Even something as quote unquote simple as just an input and a button, getting things rendered to the screen. There's a lot of different steps to be aware of. So you definitely want some good practice with this idea as you start working more with React. So there you have it. That is all the exercises. I hope you enjoyed this set of exercises in this video. If you did, I would love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I also have a Patreon, YouTube memberships, and super thanks set up if you do want to contribute that way. What we're going to do in the next video together is go over the next concepts. We're almost at the end here, home stretch, which is going to be one of my favorite topics, which is data fetching. We're going to be looking at how we can use things like state and reducer and use effect in React, which are some of the hooks that we looked at previously, to actually fetch data from a remote data source like a REST API or something like that. And that's going to have us working with promises and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. And we can make use of these tools like conditional rendering to show things like loading state and then actually the data when it actually comes back from that data source. So I'm super excited to get to those videos. I will see you in those ones. See you later.